The most consequential elements of the treaty are the ones not yet negotiated. But international law has no enforcement mechanism with teeth. 124 nations voted to adopt a document. An intergovernmental working group is active through 2026. This is the part most coverage skips entirely. On May 20th, 2025, something happened that most people still don't fully understand. 124 nations voted to adopt a document. At the 78th World Health Assembly in Geneva, no objections, 11 abstentions. The United States did not participate in the vote at all, and the document they adopted was described by the WHO as the most significant health agreement in its 77-year history, the first legally binding international pandemic treaty ever. Now here's the problem. Most people heard one of two versions of the story. Version 1 comes from mainstream media, and that is a straightforward public health agreement, cooperative, necessary, and that anyone raising concerns about it is spreading misinformation. Version 2, coming from various corners of the internet, is that this hands control of your government's health decisions to the WHO, that it allows them to mandate vaccines, that sovereignty is gone. Both versions are incomplete, and in the space between those two framings sit the actual questions worth asking. So let's read what the document actually says, and then ask the questions the media is not asking. Let's start with the basics. What is the WHO Pandemic Agreement? It's a treaty negotiated over 3 years beginning in December 2021 in direct response to the failures of the COVID-19 pandemic response. The stated goals are legitimate and understandable: better early warning systems for emerging pathogens, more equitable access to vaccines and diagnostics during outbreaks, stronger global coordination so the next pandemic response is safer, reducing the gap between wealthy and low-income countries in health emergency capacity. These are real problems. COVID exposed them clearly. Which countries pre-purchased vaccine doses before clinical trials were complete? Low-income countries waited. Global coordination was fractured. Information sharing was slow. But here's where it gets more complicated. The treaty contains language that its supporters use to dismiss sovereignty concerns. Article 3, paragraph 2 of the agreement states explicitly that nothing in the treaty shall be interpreted as providing the WHO any authority to direct, order, alter, or prescribe national laws or policies. It specifically stated the WHO cannot mandate vaccine requirements, therapeutic or diagnostic measures, travel restrictions, lockdowns. That language is in the treaty. It's real, and it matters. So the version of the story that says the WHO now controls your government is not supported by what the document actually says. But that is not the end of the conversation. It's the beginning, because the question worth asking are not about what the treaty says it won't do. They're about what it does, and about what isn't in the treaty yet. Let's start with what legally binding actually means. This is the part most coverage skips entirely. A legally binding international treaty means signatory nations have a formal obligation under international law to implement its provisions. But international law has no enforcement mechanism with teeth. There is no WHO police force. There's no international court with jurisdiction to compel compliance. What exists is reputational pressure, diplomatic consequences, potential exclusion from cooperative frameworks. Now, those are not nothing. In practice, international agreements shape behavior significantly. Nations do generally comply with treaties they've signed because non-compliance has costs, but it's not the same as domestic law. It is worth understanding that distinction rather than assuming legally binding means automatically enforceable. Now let's talk about what's not in the treaty, because this is the part that deserves the most scrutiny. The PABS system, pathogen access and benefits sharing. This is not fully negotiated. An intergovernmental working group is active through 2026. The results of that negotiation will be brought to the 79th World Health Assembly next year. And here's the critical detail. The WHO Pandemic Agreement will not be open for signature until the PABS Annex is adopted. It will not go into force until 60 nations have ratified it. So what we have right now is an adopted framework with a significant unresolved component. What is PABS? In simple terms, it's a system for deciding what happens when a new dangerous pathogen is discovered somewhere in the world. The country that identifies it would share the pathogen with the WHO's global system in exchange for guaranteed access to any vaccines or treatments developed from it. This sounds reasonable, and the principle behind it is, but the details of how sharing works, how access is guaranteed, who determines the terms, who controls the pathogen samples once shared, and what countries give up what they share, none of that is finalized. And those details are where the actual implications live. Now let's talk about the 11 nations that abstain: Bulgaria, Egypt, Iran, Israel, Italy, Jamaica, the Netherlands, Paraguay, Poland, Russia, Slovakia. These are not a monolithic group. They abstained for different reasons. Some cited the pace of the process, some cited concerns about equitable benefit sharing, some including Italy and Poland cited concerns about state sovereignty. Now the mainstream framing of sovereignty and concern is that they are false claims spread online, but Italy and Poland are not fringe actors. They are European Union member states with functioning governments, with legal advisors who read the treaty, and they still abstain over sovereignty concerns. That doesn't mean concerns are correct. It means that they are held by serious governments with serious legal teams. And that is worth sitting with rather than dismissing. The United States is a separate conversation. The US did not participate in the vote under the current administration. The US has been systematically pulling back from multilateral institutions. It withdrew from the WHO at the start of 2025, so its absence from this vote is consistent with that posture. What that means practically is that the United States is not a party to this treaty. It has no obligation under it. It has no seat at the table for the PABS negotiations. Whether that is the right decision is a separate debate, but what it means for the treaty scope is that the world's largest economy and most significant health research infrastructure is outside the framework entirely. Now let's talk about what that treaty does contain that matters, because there are provisions that go beyond coordination and cooperation. Article 12 establishes a framework for technology transfer. Signatory nations have manufacturing capacity, are encouraged to share technology, knowledge, and expertise for producing pandemic-related health products. The word encourage is important because it creates an expectation, but it doesn't make it mandatory. And in the international treaty frameworks, normative expectations have a way of becoming compliance expectations over time. Article 18 establishes a coordinating financial mechanism, a new global fund for pandemic preparedness. The details of how this is funded, how contributions are assessed, and how disbursements were governed are not fully specified in the current text. Again, the details are in the negotiations still to come. The Article 15 establishes a global supply chain and logistics network for pandemic-related health products, a permanent international infrastructure, funded through mechanisms not yet determined, governed through structures not yet finalized. This is a pattern worth noticing. The framework has been adopted, the details are pending, and the details are where the actual implications will be determined. So here is what we can say with confidence. The treaty does not give the WHO authority to override national governments. That language is explicit. The treaty does create new binding international obligations for signatory nations. Those obligations are real, even without a strong enforcement mechanism. The most consequential elements of the treaty are the ones not yet negotiated: the PABS system, the financial mechanism, the supply chain governments, and the countries that will have the most influence over those negotiations are ones most actively engaged in the process, which currently does not include the United States. Now here's a question that doesn't get asked enough. Who's asked for this? Not rhetorically, literally. The negotiating body was established at the request of member states in response to real failures the COVID exposed. The treaty was drafted over 3 years with input from 194 member nations. This was not a secret process. It was not imposed from above. It was negotiated by governments representing their populations in response to a genuine public health failure. That context matters because framing this as something being done to countries misses the fact that countries asked for it. Now, whether those governments made the right decisions, whether the treaty they produced is adequate, whether the unresolved PABS system will be negotiated fairly, whether the financial mechanisms will serve low-income nations or primarily wealthy ones, those are all legitimate open questions. And the fact that mainstream coverage largely dismisses them does not make them less legitimate. It makes them more important to ask, because legally binding deserves scrutiny. Pathogen sharing deserves scrutiny. Technology transfer obligations deserves scrutiny. Unfinished annexes that determine whether a treaty enters into force deserve scrutiny. Not because the treaty is evil, but because it's significant, and significant things deserve more than a headline. The WHO pandemic agreement is not what the panic version says it is, but it is also not as simple as the supporters claim it is. It is a real framework with real binding elements and critical unresolved details being negotiated right now with the United States not at the table. That combination of facts is the actual story, and is worth understanding properly, not from a position of fear, from a position of genuine informed awareness. Because once a framework is adopted, the negotiation of its details is where it becomes real, and those negotiations are happening now. If this gave you a clear picture of what actually happened on May 20th, share it, because most people are operating in either panic or dismissal. Neither is substitute for understanding. Subscribe if you're here for this real structure, real questions, not surface level takes. I'll see you in the next video.